I never expected the moment I'd hit the biggest milestone of my career to be the same one that cracked open the life I thought I'd built. I got the promotion, Senior Executive Counsel, a title I'd chased for years. And I got it with a handshake and an announcement from the CEO himself. The company posted it online before I could even tell Casey in person. There was applause, champagne, backslaps, and congratulations. A rare kind of joy, the kind that makes you think all the sacrifices were worth it. And all I could think about was getting home. I skipped the after-party. Left the office early, around 3 p.m. with this dumb grin on my face and a bottle of vintage wine in hand, already picturing Casey's reaction. I even swung by Logan's favorite bakery on the way, chocolate cupcakes with the cream cheese frosting he always ended up wearing more than eating. I walked in quietly, planning to catch them both by surprise. The house was oddly still, though. Too quiet. No cartoon sounds from the living room. No clatter from the kitchen. Just the hum of the fridge and the occasional creak of old wood. I figured maybe she was out picking up Logan from school. So I set the wine on the counter, kicked off my shoes, and opened my tablet to pull up the company's press release, wanted it ready to show off when they walked in. That's when I saw the notification. It was subtle, just a small ping from the shared cloud folder we'd synced years ago, back when Logan was born. Something about always having access to family memories. We never really used it anymore, but this one came from Casey's phone. Automatically uploaded. The thumbnail previewed a photo, newly added, unfiltered, unsorted. I tapped on it out of instinct. It took a moment to load. Then I saw it. Casey in the passenger seat of a car I didn't recognize. She was turned slightly toward the driver, laughing, maybe mid-conversation. But her hand was on his thigh. Resting there, fingers curled slightly inward like it wasn't the first time it had found that spot. And in the back seat, plain as day, was Logan's blue and green backpack. His name tag still attached to the zipper. I felt like I'd swallowed glass. At first, I told myself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe it was a trick of the angle. Maybe her hand was just resting awkwardly. Maybe the guy was a relative or someone I didn't remember. I stared at it until the screen dimmed. Then I opened it again. Enlarged it. Zoomed in. Stared some more. The timestamp said 2:14 p.m. That same day. My thoughts spiraled. Was this new? Was it ongoing? Was it nothing? Was it everything? By the time I heard the garage door open, I was sitting on the couch, tablet still in my lap, photos still on the screen. I didn't even know what I was planning to say. The door opened and Logan burst in first, excited and full of stories about some science project. Casey followed behind, her voice casual and cheerful. She froze when she saw me sitting there. "Hey, you're home early," she said, putting her purse down. I didn't respond. Just tilted the screen toward her. She walked over slowly, looked at the photo for a full 3 seconds. Then she gave the faintest shrug and said, "Oh, that's Shane. He gave us a ride from school. My battery died. That was it." She said it like she was reading off a grocery list. I blinked. "Who's Shane?" "A family friend," she said. No stammer. No hesitation. "He happened to be at the school event. I didn't want to call you, you were probably busy, so he offered to help." "Right," I said. "And your hand was on his?" She cut me off with a half-laugh. "Trevor, it's not what it looks like. Come on." I looked at her. Really looked. She wasn't flustered. Not embarrassed. Not sorry. Just cold. Almost bored. Like she'd expected the question and had rehearsed the answer. Her tone was clipped and practiced, the way you might explain something to a child asking why the sky was blue. "Why didn't you text me? Call me? You know I always pick up." She tilted her head. "Because it wasn't a big deal. I told you. It was just a quick ride home. You don't need to turn it into something it's not." And just like that, she walked past me, calling up the stairs to Logan about dinner. Left me there with the photo and the chill and the undeniable feeling that something had shifted under my feet. She never asked why I was home early. Never asked about my day. The wine stayed on the counter, unopened. The cupcakes sat untouched on the kitchen table. That night, after Logan went to bed, we barely spoke. She scrolled through her phone in silence while I stared at the TV, not watching a thing. Around 10 p.m. she stood up and casually said, "Don't stay up too late," then disappeared into the bedroom. I stayed downstairs for hours. The next morning, everything resumed as if nothing had happened. She made coffee, packed Logan's lunch, kissed him on the forehead and drove him to school like any other day. And yet, something inside me had calcified. Maybe it was the photo. Maybe it was her reaction. Maybe it was the fact that she didn't flinch, didn't even bother to lie well. But I knew then, even if I didn't want to admit it, that photo wasn't just a fluke. It was the first breadcrumb. After the photo, nothing looked the same. The colors of our life dulled. The house, once comforting, felt like it had been rearranged without my consent. The living room was still there, the walls still painted that soft gray she picked out, but I could no longer sit on that couch without thinking about the way she looked at me with that dismissive half-smile. I began reevaluating everything. Not just the last few weeks. Everything. Little things from the past clawed their way back into the spotlight, now carrying weight they never had before. They weren't just memories anymore, they were clues. Warnings. A trail I'd ignored for far too long. Her late meetings. God, the number of late meetings. It used to be 1 or 2 nights a week. Casey, the ever-busy PR consultant, stuck in strategy sessions or grabbing drinks with a client who wanted to network. She always had the right buzzwords. I respected her hustle. I really did. Until I realized I never saw an email, never heard the names of these clients twice. There were no follow-up meetings, no invoices, nothing tying her to the work she claimed was essential. And then there was the perfume. She used to wear a warm, subtle fragrance, one I had bought her for our anniversary. But sometime around last fall, she switched. I noticed because it was strong, bold, floral, overwhelming in the hallway when she'd rush past me in the mornings. When I asked her about it, she said it was a gift from a coworker. A women's empowerment brand, she claimed. I remember joking, is it empowering if it knocks out everyone in a 5-foot radius? She didn't laugh. She didn't even smile. Then there was Logan. He started coming home with little gifts, tiny action figures, branded school merch, once even a pair of light-up sneakers. I asked her about them and she shrugged, said she picked them up as a treat. I believed her. But the receipts never showed up in our accounts. When I brought it up once, she rolled her eyes and muttered something about using cash from her fund. I didn't ask again. Yeah? I couldn't stop asking myself why I ever stopped. And the weekends, God, the weekends. The ones she said she spent at her sister's house. I remember how she'd pack a small overnight bag, say something like, she needs help watching the twins, and kiss me on the cheek. Her sister lived 2 hours away. I never thought to question it. Why would I? I wasn't the kind of guy who checked GPS logs or asked for selfies with nieces. That felt insecure. Controlling. She counted on that. The worst part? I can't even pinpoint when I stopped being her partner and started being her cover story. Maybe I was never really one or the other. Maybe I was just a convenience. The stability she could use while she drifted further away. One night, about a week after the photo incident, I sat in my home office, staring at the framed picture of our wedding day. She looked radiant, eyes locked on mine, fingers intertwined. We had this rule then, no secrets, no silence. Looking at that photo now felt like watching 2 strangers lie to each other beautifully. I pulled up our shared cloud account again. Dug deeper. Nothing. She'd stopped using it months ago. No photos, no documents, nothing recent. She hadn't even updated Logan's school calendar in there since spring. But I kept digging. I scrolled through our text history, trying to see what I'd missed. There were gaps, odd silences. Days where she claimed to be swamped but hadn't sent a single outgoing message, at least not to me. Then I remembered that dinner party. 6 months ago. A client of mine had invited us out. She didn't want to go, said she was tired, but changed her mind at the last minute. I remember being happy to have her on my arm until we got there. Everyone was laughing at the story one of her colleagues was telling, and someone made a joke at my expense. Casey laughed a little too hard. It wasn't the laugh that stung, it was the way she looked at me while doing it. Like I was the punchline she'd been waiting to use. The next morning, I asked her about it. She brushed it off. You're being sensitive, she said, not unkindly, but like it wasn't worth discussing. It was just a joke. And I let it go. Like an idiot. But the thing is, I didn't forget. And now, in hindsight, I can't ignore what I did next. I called HR the next day and submitted a formal restructuring request for that department. I framed it as a budget realignment, but in truth, I just wanted those faces out of my life. Over the next month, I approved budget cuts and managerial reshuffles. One by one, the people from that dinner were laid off or transferred. It wasn't revenge, not exactly. It was something colder than that. It was a purge. I used to pride myself on my ability to compartmentalize. Separate the personal from the professional. But something inside me had cracked even then. I just hadn't connected the dots. That night, I stood by the window, staring out at the street. Casey was out with a friend again. I didn't even bother to ask who. I wasn't going to get an honest answer. I texted her, let me know when you're heading back. No reply. An hour passed. Then 2. Then finally, at 11:17 p.m., a simple phone died. I'm home in 10. No apology. No emoji. Just clean, efficient detachment. She walked in like nothing happened. I didn't bring up the delay. She didn't offer anything. We brushed teeth in silence, crawled into bed on opposite sides. She fell asleep quickly. Or pretended to. I lay awake staring at the ceiling. The scariest part wasn't that she might be lying. The scariest part was how easy it had become for her to lie to me. And how numb I felt about it. It happened 3 days later. A Thursday. Overcast, humid, the kind of weather that hangs in the air like an omen. I remember every detail right down to the creak in the hallway floor as I stepped through the front door. My 3 p.m. client meeting had been canceled at the last minute. I didn't even plan to come home. But something in me decided not to head back to the office. I told no one. Not Casey. Not my assistant. Not even the car that still thought I was en route to the gym. I walked into silence. Then laughter. Soft. Casual. Coming from the kitchen. I moved slowly, quietly, instinctively on edge, though I didn't know what I was expecting. As I turned the corner, I saw the back of someone's head. Male. Tall. Wavy brown hair. Sitting at our kitchen table like he belonged there. And her. Casey. At the stove, barefoot in an oversized shirt that was clearly not hers. It hung loose around her shoulders, light gray with faded navy lettering. I'd never seen it before, but it was unmistakably a man's shirt. It wasn't something she'd lounge in by accident. The table was set for 2. Candles lit. Napkins folded. A bottle of red breathing on the counter. Plates already filled, pasta, garlic bread, Caesar salad, all things I loved. All things she knew how to make perfectly. She was plating something else when she turned slightly, laughing again at something he'd said. Her body language was unguarded, familiar. She didn't flinch when he reached to pour her wine. She didn't react like a woman caught off guard by kindness. No. This was rhythm. Rehearsed. Practiced. The shirt, the meal, the music playing faintly in the background, it wasn't a surprise. It was a pattern. And this wasn't a first. I stepped back slowly, making no sound. My hand found the doorknob, turned it with precision, and I slipped out as quietly as I had entered. I didn't slam the door. I didn't shout. I didn't burst into the kitchen demanding answers. Because by then, I already had them. I got into my car and sat in the driver's seat, hands on the wheel, eyes locked forward. For 10 minutes, I didn't move. I didn't call anyone. Didn't even text. I just sat there, absorbing it. Every detail etched into my mind. The candles. The laugh. The shirt. The calm. That was the part that shook me most. There was no scrambling, no tension, no signs of guilt. They were at ease. At home. As if this had been their ritual long before I showed up early enough to see it. I drove for hours. No destination. Just asphalt and impulse. I turned off my phone halfway through. Needed the silence. Needed the clarity. When I finally pulled into a gas station somewhere off I-95, I sat there until the sun started to set. That night, I checked into a hotel under my middle name. I didn't go home. Not that night. Not the next. I needed space. Not to think, I'd already thought enough, but to plan. This wasn't going to be handled in a shouting match in our kitchen. I wasn't going to give her the performance she probably expected. No righteous fury. No dramatic confrontation. I wasn't going to be the man she could point at and say, look how angry he got. He's unstable. He's overreacting. No. She'd made her choice. I would make mine. I called my attorney, Miles, the next morning. Told him I wanted to start with a discreet background pull on a man named Shane. That was the name she had offered when I asked about the photo in the car. He made a note and didn't ask why. He knew better. In the meantime, I returned home late Sunday evening. Logan was asleep. Casey was watching a crime drama on the couch, legs tucked under her, like nothing had happened. She looked up, startled but only briefly. Hey, she said. Where have you been? Had to get some space, I said, setting my keys down. Think I caught a stomach bug. Didn't want to bring it home? She blinked. Oh. You could have just texted. Phone died, I said. She nodded. You okay now? Getting there. She didn't press. Didn't seem suspicious. Just nodded again and turned back to the TV. We watched in silence for half an hour. Then she kissed me goodnight and went upstairs. I stayed on the couch watching the screen even after the episode ended. 2 days later, the package arrived from Miles. A manila envelope with a thin file inside. Shane M. Danner. Age 38. Divorced. Former contractor, currently working in logistics. No criminal record. Low profile. And one address. A condo 20 minutes from our neighborhood. Inside the file was something else, a printed screenshot *T from the school's website. Logan's emergency contact info. Shane Danner. Not me. Not Casey's sister. Shane. and it had been listed that way since Logan entered the school system. For years ago. I sat there, fingers trembling as I flipped through the rest of the documents. Casey's name on school forms, Shane's name below hers. In some places even listed first. There were traces of Shane in doctor appointment confirmations. Insurance paperwork. A name hidden in plain sight. None of it bore my signature. Not once had she asked me to sign off on anything. Not when Logan switched pediatricians. Not when he started kindergarten. I had assumed everything was filed under my name, Trevor Banks' father. But no. I was nowhere. And yet I was the one taking Logan to soccer. The one helping with homework. The one staying up through every fever and cough. Suddenly, the photo in the car felt less like a slip-up and more like an announcement. The next day, I stayed home from work. Claimed I needed a mental health break. Casey didn't ask questions. At 1:30 p.m., the doorbell rang. I opened it to find a courier holding a plain white envelope. Inside were the initial court filings. She had beaten me to it. Casey had filed a motion for child support. The phrasing was cold. Legalistic. It referred to me as Logan's presumed father, citing my involvement in his life, our shared home, and the hospital records where my name had been added per marital assumption. There it was. She knew I wasn't his biological father. And she had known all along. Yet here she was, citing my involvement as a we *p*n to keep me tethered to her mess. The gall of it. The cruelty. The precision. I called Miles immediately. We need to initiate a paternity test, I told him. He didn't hesitate. I'll arrange it. That night, Casey made spaghetti. She hummed as she cooked. Logan was in a good mood, showing me a picture he drew at school. I smiled at him. Not at her. My mind was elsewhere, on swabs, on court dates, on truth. It was no longer about the marriage. It was about facts. The results came back 7 days later, though the longest wait was never for the envelope, it was the silence before I opened it. I stood alone in my office, blinds drawn, the envelope from the lab weighing down my desk like it carried a verdict from a god. I could hear Logan's voice in the background through the floorboards, muffled by cartoons and Casey's off-key singing. It felt like I was standing on a cliff's edge, holding proof that could either anchor me or push me off completely. I opened it. The conclusion was printed in bold font at the bottom of the page, clinical and unfeeling. Probability of paternity, 0%. No room for misunderstanding. No decimal points to argue. 0. I stood motionless for a moment, letting that number settle into my bones. All the nights rocking him back to sleep. Every school lunch I packed. Every whispered, "It's okay, buddy, I'm here." All of it evaporated in that 0. I wasn't his father. Not legally. Not biologically. And according to her, not emotionally anymore either. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even sit down. I just walked over to the safe in the corner of my office, pulled out our marriage license, Logan's birth certificate, and every legal document Casey and I had signed together since the day we said "I do." I stacked them neatly and placed the lab results on top. Then I called Miles. "Got the test results," I said. "Understood," he replied. "I'll file the rebuttal today. This ends the presumption of paternity. She won't see it coming." "She filed first," I said, still staring at the papers. "Did you look through her claim?" "I did," Miles said. "She framed it like a plea for fairness. Claimed emotional reliance, financial consistency. Said you were the only father Logan ever knew." "Convenient," I muttered. "There's more," Miles added, his tone tightening. "I ran a deeper search into the health insurance logs you asked about. And? You were removed as primary guardian on Logan's insurance policy 2 years ago. Removed. Without your signature. Someone named Shane Danner is listed as the emergency contact and the secondary policyholder." I closed my eyes. 2 years. That would have been around the time Casey changed providers. She said it was to get a lower deductible. I'd shrugged it off. Trusted her with the paperwork like I always had. "I also found this," Miles continued. "There are photos. School newsletters, class photos, social posts from other parents. Shane appears in nearly all of them." I sat down finally, slowly, as if my body had just remembered gravity. "Send me everything," I said. When the packet arrived the next day, it felt like flipping through a stranger's scrapbook. Shane posing with Logan and other kids on a field trip. Shane wearing a PDA volunteer badge. Shane listed as a parent chaperone at Logan's 3rd grade holiday party. He was everywhere I wasn't. And Casey never said a word. Later that week, we were summoned to a preliminary hearing. Just paperwork processing. No arguments, no decisions. I walked into the courthouse in a pressed navy suit. She arrived 15 minutes late, wearing a white blouse and soft makeup like she was going to a brunch. Not a war. We didn't speak. Her attorney was a man named Wilkes. Sharp-suited, overly confident, with a voice that belonged in car commercials. He smiled when we sat down, like this was just another transaction. When the clerk called us in, the judge briefly reviewed the case file, flipping through a stack of forms and motions. She paused when she got to the paternity rebuttal. "Miss Banks," she said, eyes peering over the rim of her glasses. "Are you aware that Mr. Banks has filed a motion challenging legal paternity?" Casey cleared her throat. "Yes, Your Honor. But I believe that a DNA test doesn't change the years of parenting Trevor has provided." The judge didn't blink. "It does under the law." Casey's lips parted slightly, but she said nothing. Her attorney tried to pivot. "Your Honor, while we understand the DNA result, we believe it's in the child's best interest to maintain the existing support structure. Logan is bonded to Mr. Banks. Removing that support would cause emotional harm. Are there any legal documents that name Mr. Banks as an adoptive parent?" the judge asked. "No, Your Honor," Wilkes admitted. "Was there any formal step-parent adoption process initiated?" "No." "Then you're asking this court to enforce an emotional obligation without legal foundation?" Silence. I stared straight ahead. I didn't smile, didn't gloat. I just waited. The judge nodded. "We'll reconvene in 3 weeks. I suggest both parties prepare for mediation. And Miss Banks," she paused, "you might consider the risks of continuing this motion without legal grounds." Casey nodded slowly. When we stepped into the hallway afterward, she walked up beside me, still calm. "You didn't have to do this," she said. "I did," I replied. "Logan loves you. He thinks you're his dad. You let him believe that," I said, turning to face her. "That wasn't my lie. That was yours." Her mouth tightened, but she didn't speak. "You told him every day to call me Dad. And at the same time, you were building a life with someone else. You filed for support knowing I wasn't his biological father. You signed forms I never saw. You put Shane's name where mine used to be. So don't stand there and act like I'm the one who broke something." She looked away. "I just wanted stability for him," she said finally. "Then you should have told the truth," I replied. I turned and walked away. 3 days later, I got a message from Miles. Casey had added new items to her submission: photos, birthday cards, notes Logan had written, emotional exhibits meant to reinforce the role I'd played. Miles responded by uploading the full report: DNA test, school records, insurance logs, email chains, and Shane's appearance history in every part of Logan's life. It was brutal, and it was necessary. We were due back in court the following Monday. Miles said there was a 90% chance the judge would terminate all obligations. I didn't feel victorious, just tired. That Friday night, I sat on the back porch with a glass of scotch and the court file on my lap. I flipped through Logan's drawings. A few of them had my name. Me and Dad at the park. Daddy helping me with my fort. Stick figures with my bald head and his wide smile. I closed the folder. I couldn't be angry at Logan, but I was done being used. By the time the final court date rolled around, the only feeling I had left was resolve. Not hope, not anger, just a cold clarity that had settled into my bones. I wasn't fighting for revenge anymore. I was fighting to reclaim the truth of my life, and that meant dragging every buried lie into the light. The courtroom wasn't dramatic. No crowd, no gasps, no slamming gavels. Just wood paneling, fluorescent lights, and the same judge flipping through the final pages of the case. Miles sat beside me, quiet but steady. Across the aisle, Casey was alone. Wilkes had withdrawn after realizing his argument had no legal ground to stand on. She looked smaller, somehow less composed than usual. Not broken, but less certain. Like someone who'd built a house of cards and finally realized she couldn't keep it from collapsing. The judge didn't take long. In the matter of Logan Banks, she began, "This court acknowledges the DNA report indicating zero biological relation to Mr. Trevor Banks. Furthermore, due to the absence of legal adoption and the presence of alternative guardian information naming Mr. Shane Danner, we hereby terminate Mr. Banks' legal obligations toward the minor child. No child support. No custody. No mediation. Just a final decree that cut the last thread tethering me to the lie Casey had built. Casey didn't say a word as the judge finished. She just sat there, hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the floor. When it was over, she gathered her papers in silence and walked out of the courtroom. I didn't follow. Instead, I stood still for a moment, absorbing the weight of the judgment. It should have felt like closure. But all it felt like was absence. Like waking up from a long dream and realizing the house is empty. Back home, I sat on the edge of our bed, my bed now, and opened the remaining files Miles had handed me. The deeper dive into Shane's history revealed more than just appearances at school and doctor's appointments. It revealed intent. His name showed up in emails from Casey's work calendar years back. Some flagged as personal, others masked as client meetings. There were exchanges about daycare pickups, appointment coordination, even a series of messages referencing our timeline. One thread stood out. It was dated 2 weeks before Logan's birth. The subject line was simple: confirmation. The message, written by Shane, read, "Got the forms. They'll never know. We're good." No attachment. No context. Just that. Then came the photo logs, images from Casey's old cloud backups Miles had retrieved before she restricted access. One from a baby shower. Shane in the background, barely noticeable, leaning against a doorway with a drink in hand. Another from the hospital lobby. He wasn't in the delivery room, but he was there. Nearby. And then the biggest one. A scan of an insurance policy submitted just after Logan's birth. The beneficiary section listed, Casey Banks, Logan Banks, Shane Danner, emergency addendum. It was dated 3 weeks before I ever held Logan for the first time. I stared at the signature. It was hers, not mine. She'd filed the paperwork with Shane's name before I ever saw the birth certificate. Miles called later that day. "Want me to pursue fraud?" he asked. I didn't answer immediately. "It's your right," he said. "You were misled into signing hospital forms, making medical payments, and providing insurance coverage for a child that wasn't biologically yours. There's precedent." I thought about it. I really did. But in the end, I told him no. Not because she didn't deserve it, but because I didn't want to be legally tied to her for one more second. He respected that. That evening, I found myself walking through the house with a different kind of vision. Every room looked like a crime scene. Not violent, just strategic. A chessboard, every piece moved carefully while I was distracted by life. The dining table where she first brought up working weekends. The couch where she sat, scrolling through her phone while I read bedtime stories upstairs. The coat rack where Shane's hoodie had once hung, mistaken by me for one of Logan's jackets. She hadn't cheated in a moment of weakness. She'd orchestrated a life. It was a blueprint executed with precision. While I was in courtrooms and boardrooms, she was building a second reality right under my nose. I remember asking her once, years ago, if she believed people could lead double lives. She'd laughed. "You think I'm capable of something like that?" she'd said, curling up next to me with a smirk. I'd laughed too. "Yeah?" I could still hear the echo of that question in the walls. That weekend, she showed up unannounced. Logan wasn't with her. I opened the door to find her standing there, holding a small photo album. "I just wanted to give you this," she said, extending it to me. I didn't take it. She looked tired. Pale. Not worn down, but cracked around the edges. "I know you hate me," she said softly. "I don't," I replied. "I don't feel anything at all." She winced, but nodded. "I didn't plan for it to get this far," she said. "But you planned something," I countered. She didn't deny it. "He wasn't supposed to be yours," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "At least, not forever. It just happened. And then I couldn't unwind it." "So you doubled down?" She looked up at me then, eyes glistening. "You were a good dad. Better than I ever expected. That's the part one didn't see coming. And Shane. He wanted a child. Not a family." I stared at her, wondering how a person could admit so much and still sound so detached. "I'll never forgive you," I said, not cruel, just fact. "I know," she whispered. Then she handed me the photo album anyway. I didn't open it. I just watched as she walked away. Inside, I placed the album in the same box where I'd stored the court documents, the insurance records, the DNA results. The box was labeled in Sharpie, "Never trust words without proof." The final court date was short. Just 32 minutes, including pleasantries and paperwork. No fireworks, no last-minute objections, no drama. Just the end of a story I didn't write but had been forced to read line by line. Casey arrived early. She looked restrained. No makeup, a plain black blouse, and a folder full of what she must have hoped would sway the court, printed photos, birthday cards I'd written, Logan's drawings of the three of us at the beach. It was all designed to say one thing: he was always his father. Emotionally, maybe. Biologically, legally, definitively, not at all. My attorney presented the facts with surgical precision: the DNA test, the insurance forms, the years of decisions made without my consent. There were no loud words, just a quiet avalanche of evidence that buried the fantasy Casey tried to maintain. The judge read the documents, nodded once, and delivered the ruling. Parental obligations terminated. No child support required. No shared custody. No visitation. Just a clean break. Casey didn't speak. Not in the courtroom. Not afterward in the hall. She just stood there, lips parted slightly like she wanted to say something, but the moment passed and I kept walking. By the time I got home, the silence was unbearable. It wasn't relief. It was space. Endless, echoing space. I'd been freed from a lie, but there was no joy in it. Only air where weight used to be. I left everything behind within a month. Sold the house, packed what I needed, and moved south to St. Augustine. A coastal town, quiet, with old architecture and ocean air that didn't carry memories. I started fresh at a smaller firm, less prestige, more peace. That was the trade I made. I deleted every social media account, started new ones under a slightly altered name. Not to hide from anyone. Just to disappear from the past. Casey still sent messages. Sometimes updates about Logan. Sometimes photos. Sometimes just empty lines like she didn't know what to say but couldn't stop herself from reaching out. I never responded. I marked Logan's birthday on my calendar. When the day came, I stayed inside, blinds drawn, phone off. It was raining, a coincidence, but it felt right. I didn't cry. I didn't drink. I just sat with it. The ache. The absence. Freedom came with a price, knowing I'd spent years living someone else's script. I keep a box in the corner of my closet. Inside is everything: court documents, photos, the DNA report, a copy of the verdict. And on top, a label I printed myself. Never trust words without proof. And I don't. Not anymore.